Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves, really getting stuck into a piece of literature that I think for many has kind of defined the whole experience of bureaucratic dread. Franz Kafka's The Trial.
Absolutely. A classic.
But our mission today, it isn't just to rehash the usual analysis. Stuffy clerks, infinite waiting rooms, that whole thing.
Exactly. Because for nearly a century now, the trial has mostly been read as, well, a moral fable, right? Or maybe an exploration of guilt, or just a sharp critique of modern states, modern bureaucracy.
Yeah, the crushing machine.
The crushing machine. But the sources we've pulled together, they suggest something. Well, something radically different. A much more profound interpretation, really.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Different how?
They argue that Kafka's masterpiece, it operates less like a political statement, less social critique,
Yeah.
and more like a formal logical experiment, almost like a theorem, but wrapped up in a narrative.
A logical experiment, so like math in a novel.
Sort of, yeah. Well, maybe not equations, but logical structure. Our deep dive today is really dedicated to unpacking this specific argument, that the trial is this stunning, almost intuitive realization of a concept called undecidability.
Undecidability, okay.
And here's the kicker. It seems to predate and parallel one of the foundational concepts, or maybe limitations, in computer science. Alan Turing's halting problem.
Wow, okay. Kafka and Turing.
Yeah.
That's quite a connection. You don't usually hear those names in the same sentence.
Not usually, no. And this reading, it suggests the novel isn't really about human failure, like K messing up somehow. It's about structural limits. The core paradox it explores is whether any system...
And the law in the book.
Exactly, or maybe the universe, or even a really complex computer program.
Yeah.
Whether that system can ever fully analyze and understand its own boundary conditions, its own totality, especially the thing doing the analyzing is actually part of that system.
Right, you can't see the whole picture when you're inside the frame.
That's a great way to put it. You're stuck inside. So you might be asking, why should this, kind of esoteric connection between early 20th century literature and mid-century computer theory actually matter?
Yeah, why should you care?
Well, because it completely shifts the focus. It takes it away from just the personal suffering of Joseph K., the protagonist.
With Joseph K.
Poor Joseph K., indeed. And it moves it towards the universal structure of existence itself. It sort of transforms K's tragic fate into an inevitable proof point, a demonstration of a logical law that seems to govern computation, logic, and, well, maybe even reality itself.
So it's like taking all that existential dread, that feeling of being trapped,
Nah.
and boiling it down to something almost mathematical, a boundary condition.
Exactly. It's almost like an intellectual shortcut through the dread. It doesn't make the dread go away, maybe, but it reframes it as a fundamental structural issue, not just bad luck or personal failing.
Okay, let's start digging into that. First, we probably need to address the standard reading, the one most people encounter. When you first read The Trial, what jumps out is the sheer absurdity of the bureaucracy. Right?
Oh, absolutely. It's overwhelming.
The court offices are shoved into these cramped, dingy attic spaces.
Yeah.
The officials seem either corrupt or just totally distracted.
Yeah.
The filing system, if you can even call it that, seems like complete nonsense.
Total chaos. Stacks of paper everywhere, dust.
Right. And most readings really focus on that mess. They see it as Kafka criticizing how inefficient or dehumanizing modern institutions are becoming.
And that focus, while understandable, might actually be misleading, according to this structural analysis we're exploring.
How so?
Well, to view all those details, the addicts, the corrupt officials, as merely a critique of poor governance, well, it kind of misses the deeper mechanism at play. The sources we're looking at, they really insist that the novel is less interested in how corrupt the institutions are, and much more interested in demonstrating a fundamental, logical, structural problem. This isn't just inefficiency, it's something more profound. It's like logical impossibility made real, made narrative.
Okay, so we're shifting perspective here. It's not that the system is just broken.
Right.
It's that the system might be like structurally designed so that it fundamentally cannot be understood from the inside. Is that it?
That's precisely the idea.
Yeah.
The novel seems to illustrate a structure where a comprehensive judgment, a final, absolute outside verdict, simply cannot be performed by anyone who is operating within that legal structure itself.
Because they're part of it.
Exactly. If we accept, for the sake of argument, that the law defines the entire world K inhabits, and K is clearly an element within that world, then he's trying to do something epistemologically impossible. He's trying to achieve complete self-comprehension of the system that governs him from inside that system.
Yeah, that immediately makes me think of like a computer program trying to analyze its own code while it's running,
Yep.
or trying to write its own definition in real time.
That's a perfect analogy. And the source material actually uses a very similar one. Can we maybe unpack that a bit? How the law functions as the program?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so the law in the trial, in this view, acts like the formal procedure. It's the program, the algorithm, the set of instructions governing K's situation. It does have rules, apparently rules for appeals, examinations, trials, even if those rules are completely obscure and K can never pin them down.
Right, they're implied rules almost, or rumored rules.
Rumored rules, exactly.
Yeah.
And Joseph K. himself, he's the entity within that system. He's like the computational function, maybe, that's trying to perform this logically impossible task, understanding the system's totality, trying to calculate its endpoint, its halting state.
Well, his very actions are part of the calculation.
Precisely. His actions, his attempts to understand are inherently fueling the procedure. They're running the program itself. He's like a subroutine trying to analyze the entire operational stack while simultaneously being essential for that stack to even function. He can't step outside it.
Okay, so to really grasp why this attempt is impossible, we need to bring in the big guns. We need to talk about Alan Turing.
Yes. Time for Turing.
Let's introduce the concept that gives us the formal mathematical proof for what Kafka seems to have grasped intuitively. The halting problem.
Right, the halting problem. Well, it's probably the most famous logical restriction in all of computational theory, maybe one of the most profound results of 20th century logic, period.
So what did Turing prove?
Turing proved back in 1936 that no universal algorithm can exist. You just can't build a perfect predictive program, one single program, that can take any other arbitrary computer program, let's call it P,
Okay.
and any input for that program, say X, and definitively determine in a finite amount of time whether program P, when run with input X, will eventually stop or halt, or whether it will just run forever, stuck in an infinite, non-stopping loop.
Wow. So it's not just that we haven't found the magic predictor program yet.
No, that's the crucial point.
It's that such a program cannot exist.
Right.
Fundamentally impossible.
Fundamentally impossible. It's like a logical no trespassing sign for computation. You simply cannot build a perfect universal predictor of program termination. It leads to a contradiction.
Can we try that dictionary analogy you mentioned? Maybe that helps visualize.
Yeah, let's try. Imagine you want to build the ultimate universal dictionary.
Okay.
This dictionary has to contain a definition for absolutely every word that could ever possibly be used.
Ambitious project.
Very ambitious. Now, the problem comes when you try to define certain things within that dictionary. Like, what if you try to include a definition for the dictionary itself inside its own pages?
Oh.
Or what if you try to define the very concept of definition using only words and definitions found within that same book? You immediately run into these tricky self-reference problems, loops, paradoxes that prevent the whole project from ever being completed consistently.
Right, like saying, this statement is false.
Exactly like that. The halting problem, in essence, says you can never build a program that can reliably step outside every other conceivable program, including self-referential ones, to definitively predict its end state without potentially running into such paradoxes.
Okay, that clarifies the impossibility. Now, connect that back to Kafka. How does this resonate with the trial?
Well, this is where the literary parallel becomes just incredibly powerful, I think. The sources we're drawing on argue that Kafka, writing decades before Turing, formalized this.
Yeah, way before.
Had this profound artistic intuition of this very logical restriction. There's a quote from the source material that's just chilling when you see it in this light. It says, "No human exists who can understand the possibility of the termination of all lawsuits."
Wow, okay. That lands differently now.
Right. The lawsuit, K's trial, in this interpretation is simply the literary narrative visualization of that impossible-to-analyze program.
The program that might run forever.
Exactly. And K spends the entire novel attempting to find the verdicts, the endpoint, you could say the logical halt status of his own legal procedure.
But this act, according to this view, is logically impossible from the get-go.
That's what the sources argue. It's a closed system, the law's world, attempting to calculate its own internal termination status through one of its own components, K.
And this impossibility generates what the sources are calling the self-referential paradox.
Yes.
So the tragedy isn't just that K is suffering under, mean or incompetent judges. The tragedy is structural.
Yeah.
It's inescapable because of the logic of the situation itself.
That's the core of it. And think about how this plays out. The deeper Kay investigates the reality of the law, the more he tries to understand it to find its source,
Uh-huh.
the more his own investigation becomes evidence used by the law. It confirms the law's reality, its reach. And paradoxically, the actual definition or source of the law seems to recede further away the harder he looks.
He's running in a loop that just digs the groove deeper.
Precisely. It's like he's searching for the instruction manual for the universe, but he slowly realizes that every single place he looks is already part of the universe described by the manual he can't find. He can't get outside it to read it.
So that infinite deepening cycle, that's what they mean by a narrative proof of the limits of decidability.
Exactly. It suggests Kay cannot make a definitive decision about whether his trial will ever end, because his very attempt to decide is the mechanism ensuring the trial's continuation. He is completely trapped in a feedback loop of his own making, yet not of his own design.
Okay. And this perspective,
Yeah.
it does provide a different kind of explanation for why the novel feels so profoundly absurd.
Right. It's not absurd just because the judges are weird or the offices are addicts.
It's absurd because we're watching a human mind, Joseph Kay's mind, grapple with a formal logical constraint, a paradox, that fundamentally cannot be broken or resolved from his position. It's the absurdity of banging your head against a logical wall. All right, so we have this framework. The law as an unhalting program, Kay, as the entity trapped trying to compute its end state. Now let's try applying this formal logic idea to the actual, the feel of the novel, the physical and sensory experience of reading it.
Okay.
When we read the trial, one of the most striking things is the lack of clarity, right? There are no clearly written statutes Kay can consult. There are no properly defined courtrooms, really, just borrowed rooms and attics. There's no explicit judgment delivered until the very, very end.
It's incredibly vague, slippery.
Exactly. And the common mistake, the usual interpretation, is to read this lack of definition as meaning the law is weak or maybe even absent, like the system is so broken it barely exists.
Yes, that's a very common reading. But the sources we're engaging with, they vehemently refute that idea. They argue completely the opposite.
What's the opposite?
They argue that this pervasive lack of external formal definition, the lack of clear rules, clear buildings, it doesn't signify an absence of order or law at all. Instead, it signifies an excessively internalized state of law.
Excessively internalized. What does that mean?
It means the law isn't some external force Kay is fighting against, like, say, the police in a normal crime story. Instead, it's become this ubiquitous, controlling force that has already permeated everything. It's already become part of Kay's own consciousness, his way of thinking.
Wow. Okay, so it's not an opponent outside him.
Not primarily, no.
It's more like an internal condition, a sense of procedure, as the sources call it, that's already infected his mind.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. Think about that very first scene. Kay wakes up and he's told he's arrested.
But he's not physically restrained. Right, he goes to work later that day.
Exactly. He's not dragged off in chains. But what's his immediate reaction? Does he laugh it off? Does he demand to see a warrant, question the legitimacy, call a lawyer right away?
No. He starts trying to figure out why. He assumes it must be real.
He immediately starts trying to explain himself, trying to figure out what he might have done wrong, how he's become entangled. He seeks to prove that he somehow belongs within this structure, that there must be a reason, rather than fundamentally questioning the structure's existence or its right to accost him.
So he implicitly accepts the law's reality from the first moment. He assumes guilt, or at least involvement, before he even knows what the supposed charge is.
Precisely. The law, in this reading, functions less like an external regulatory body and more like an operating system that's already been installed in his mind and maybe in the world around him. He doesn't ask if the system exists. He immediately starts asking how he can navigate his position within this system he instinctively immediately accepts as real.
Okay, so this allows us to define the law in a new way, not as rules on paper, but as an invisible real.
Exactly. That's the term the sources use. An invisible real.
Like an underlying pervasive order, maybe like Platonic ideals or, theological absolute in some systems, something you can't directly see or touch, but it dictates everything that happens within the system it governs.
That's the idea. It's the ghost in the machine, the hidden operating system. And Kay's whole struggle is like he's constantly running diagnostics, trying desperately to find the source code to see the ghost.
And this is why maybe the physical details in the novel become so important. They're not just setting the scene.
According to this view, absolutely not just scene setting. Kay's intense anxiety, his physical reactions, they're presented as symptoms. The physical manifestations of this invisible reality operating on him.
Okay, like what specifically?
The sources draw really specific attention to sensory data in the novel, things like the stale, suffocating, almost unbreathable air in the court hallways, the oppressive darkness of the warehouse where the guards are being flogged, even seemingly small things like the peculiar quality of light in Lenny's maid's room, or the lawyer Hull's pervasive, meaningful silences.
So those aren't just, atmospheric descriptions to make it feel gloomy.
Not just that, in this framework, they are the sensory inputs, the data points, that indicate the operation of this massive, unperceivable machine, this invisible reel, that is processing Kay's reality, consuming his life.
They're like the flicker of the hard drive light, showing the program is running even if you don't know what it's doing.
That's a fantastic analogy, yes. They are the reference points we use, and Kay uses, to measure the tangible reality of this intangible law. And if we push the computational metaphor further, if we look at the law purely through that computational lens, the sources suggest it's not designed like a perfect decider program, one that takes input and gives a clear yes-no answer or a judgment. Rather, it seems to operate by constantly producing reference errors. Think of it like a mathematical function that accepts input K's efforts, his life story, his appeals, his attempts to understand.
All the data he feeds it.
All the data he feeds it. But it consistently fails to produce a satisfactory defined result. It doesn't output a clear guilty or innocent or case dismissed. It just keeps processing or failing to resolve.
I see. So it's a program that's designed not necessarily to solve the problem K presents, but maybe just to sustain the process indefinitely.
That's the implication. That sustained failure to produce a final output is the system's operational mode. Its currency, you might say. The law doesn't run on achieving perfect justice or efficiency. It runs, perhaps, on the continuous, predictable non-delivery of a final answer. That's what keeps it alive.
Which leads us to a really paradoxical definition for the law itself, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if its existence, its power, comes from the fact that its absence cannot be proven. If K can never definitively say the law isn't real or my case is closed, then the perceived absence of law, the vagueness, the lack of clear rules, isn't absence at all.
I see where you're going.
It's actually the law's own mechanism for maintaining infinite recursion. It keeps running because K keeps trying to debug it to find its end, and he can never prove it doesn't exist or isn't still processing him.
That fits perfectly. And Kay's entire existence, then his attempts to determine if the trial is legitimate, if the procedures are being followed correctly, his search for the highest judge, all of that becomes an integral, absolutely necessary part of the trial's ongoing procedure.
His energy is the fuel that keeps the infinite loop spinning.
Exactly. He feeds the machine by fighting it.
So if we look at Kay's condition through this lens, his freedom isn't simply taken away in the traditional sense. It's what?
It's infinitely postponed. The sources use that phrase. The very definition of his legal case, his entire experience in the novel, is that endless waiting, that perpetual state of being processed without end. The infinite postponement is the lawsuit. That's what the trial is.
That's heavy. Okay.
And this logically compels the source material to suggest a fundamental reclassification of the novel's genre.
From what to what?
It moves it away from just being social critical realism, a story about the problems in society.
Right.
And towards being something like an ontological algorithm novel.
An ontological algorithm novel.
Okay.
Unpack that.
It means the system, the law, maintains itself not by delivering justice or punishment in any conventional sense, but by implementing this continuous self-sustaining loop of undecidability. Its function is the loop.
This feels incredibly modern, actually. Ahead of its time. It suggests that the human subject caught in this kind of structure,
Right.
they aren't necessarily a sinner needing redemption or a revolutionary needing to overthrow the system.
Maybe more like.
More like a central processing unit, a component within the machine attempting to resolve a structural error, a paradox that fundamentally cannot be resolved from its position.
Yes. And the terror, the existential dread that the book evokes so powerfully, maybe it comes from the dawning realization that we are all structurally, potentially Joseph K. We all operate within systems, social, psychological, maybe even physical, whose ultimate rules and end states might be beyond our capacity to fully comprehend or control from within.
Okay, that brings us right back to Joseph K. himself, doesn't it? K standing there trying to perform this impossible calculation.
The man in the machine.
Exactly. So if we look at the whole arc of the story, from the arrest to the end, This interpretation suggests it's not just a narrative about a trial that frustratingly never seems to end.
No, it's more structured than just frustration.
It's more like a literary demonstration, a proof
Mhm.
of why any entity, any K, who attempts to judge the system's viability, its endpoint, its very nature, from within that system, why that attempt must necessarily lead to contradiction and failure.
Right. And to really nail this down, let's quickly revisit Turing's construction again, because K's actions perfectly mirror the logic Turing used.
Okay, refresh us on that. How did Turing prove the halting problem?
So Turing needed to prove that a hypothetical universal halting predictor, let's call it nullis flatter, for halting predictor couldn't exist. Dollars is supposed to take any program $2 and its input $6 and tell you if TX dollars halts or loops forever.
Right, the magic predictor.
The magic predictor. To show dollar is impossible, Turing imagined constructing a special, mischievous, self-referential program. Let's call this troublemaker program dollars.
Okay, program dollars, what does it do?
Program dollars does something very specific. First, it takes its own code as its input, so it's looking at itself.
Referential, got it.
Then it uses the hypothetical halting predictor dollars to analyze itself. It asks, saying, oh, if I run myself, will I halt?
Okay.
Now, here's the trick dollars. If a G dollar predicts, yes, the dollars you will halt, then program dollars is specifically designed to say, aha, in that case, I will enter an infinite loop right now and run forever.
Oh, okay.
But if a dollar predicts, no, you will loop forever, then program dollar is designed to say, oh, really, watch this, and it immediately halts, it stops.
So no matter what the predictor dollar says,
Program dollars does the exact opposite. It contradicts the prediction, which means
the predictor dollars must be flawed. It can't exist and be universally correct, because dollars can always fool it.
precisely. The very existence of a program like dollar demonstrates the logical impossibility of a perfect, universal, halting predictor, dollar defeats itself when faced with dollars.
And the argument is K is dollars.
K is the narrative embodiment of this self-negating, impossible decider. His very effort, his struggle to define the law, to stop the trial, to understand the system's rules and endpoint, that effort is the mechanism that generates the necessary contradiction. It ensures the law, the system, continues operating precisely because he's trying to make it stop or define itself in a way it logically can't.
So it's not just passively caught.
Yeah.
His actions are actively maintaining the system he hates.
Yes. It's active system maintenance, paradoxically.
Yeah.
K attempts to stop the trial through his appeals, his explanations, his frantic search for the final judge, the ultimate authority, but this struggle isn't just futile in achieving his goal.
It's essential for the court system itself.
It seems to be. His effort, his input, functions as the necessary condition for the law, for this program, to operate indefinitely. He provides the running part of the program.
Let's look closer at that. That paradoxical sustenance of the trial. He tries to explain his innocence.
Yeah.
He tries to find the truth behind the whole system.
Constantly.
But in doing so, he's creating records for the law. He's using the law's own obscure language and channels. He's generating more paperwork, more procedure, more entanglement.
He literally becomes the system's own self-generated proof. It's evidence, as the sources put it. His file grows thicker with his own attempts to close it.
So it's not just political chaos or bureaucratic inefficiency causing this.
No, this reading suggests it's a visualization of a logical impossibility. He enters that self-referential circuit. Trying to understand the law makes him part of the law, and the circuit ensures its own continuation by feeding off his very attempts to escape it. His search for the truth is the trial process.
Okay, so if the law is the unhalting program, then Joseph K. is the subject trapped within the infinite loop that gets generated when that program attempts to interpret or analyze itself.
That's a very clear way to state it, yes?
And this has huge implications for how we read his execution at the end, doesn't it?
Completely changes the meaning. Traditional readings often see K's death as the system finally breaking him, or perhaps delivering its brutal, albeit obscure, final verdict, the end of the process.
Right, the system wins, K loses, end of story.
But in this formal, logical framework, his death is interpreted very differently. It's seen not as the event where the law is terminated or the case is closed, but as the event that structurally proves the law cannot be perminated. His death confirms the loop is infinite. The failure of his life to find an end becomes the ultimate success of the system's self-sustaining, non-halting nature.
Okay, I have to admit, I need to push back on that a little bit, or at least question it, because that sounds, well, incredibly cold. It feels like forcing a purely mathematical or logical interpretation onto a moment of profound human shame, degradation, and violence.
That's a very fair and important point. The end is brutal.
And K's final utterance, just before the knife, like a dog, or
Mhm.
like a dog.
Mm.
How can we just analyze that as like the failed output of a logical operation?
Yeah.
Isn't it just a cry of utter human despair and defeat?
That's absolutely the crux of it, and the sources we're using anticipate this exact reaction. They don't deny the horror or the human element, but they offer an additional layer of interpretation.
Which
Does
is
the interpret like a dog, not just as an emotional expression of defeat or shame, though it surely resonates that way too, but also as the final failed attempt by K, by the human consciousness within the system, to categorize or articulate the system's fundamental nature, its undecidability.
So he's trying one last time to put a label on it, to summarize the whole horrific experience.
Yes. He's trying to provide one final output, a human word, a judgment, to summarize the entire operation that has just consumed his life. He's trying to compute a final meaning.
And the human language compiler, faced with this paradoxical, undecidable system, the best it can manage is like a dog.
Yeah.
It's like a failure of categorization, a type error.
You could see it that way, yes. It's the closest human language can get, perhaps, to articulating a catastrophic reference error, a total system failure that results from the impossible task Kay set himself. Trying to verify the world's rationality, trying to make the law halt and explain itself.
So his death becomes the final confirmation. The program runs indefinitely, and his last words articulate the specific failure mode of the self-deciding structure when it hits that logical wall.
That's the argument. And when you view the entire novel through this lens, it really does transform into something quite extraordinary. It becomes the literary formalization avant la lettre of the logical and maybe even metaphysical halting problem.
Kay's whole existence, his trial. It's the world's attempt, through him, to verify its own rationality, its own capacity for final judgment.
An attempt that, tragically and repeatedly, proves the fundamental impossibility of that verification from within.
Okay, let's pause here. If the system, the law, is fundamentally undecidable, if Kay is trapped in this unhalting program that he cannot stop or fully comprehend from the inside, the logical argument gives us the constraint, the boundary condition.
Yes, it defines the impossibility.
But it feels bleak. Where does human meaning or dignity reside in such a world? If success is impossible, what's the point?
This is precisely where the analysis has to transition, I think. It moves from pure logic to ethics. And the sources offer a really interesting perspective here.
Okay.
They argue that the law remains unexplained, the trial never truly resolves, not because Kay failed morally or because he wasn't smart enough or persistent enough.
Right, not a personal failing.
Not primarily a personal failing, but because the law as a concept, as a system, exists beyond the structural computational limits of human cognition. It's like trying to grasp a fifth dimension using only our three-dimensional senses. It's a category error, fundamentally not a moral one.
Okay, that changes how we see Kay's efforts then. And it has also changed how we interpret his ultimate end, his death.
Absolutely. If it's not a judgment in the normal sense, what is it?
So his death isn't the absence of grace or the final failure of justice to arrive.
The sources suggest something quite different. They define his end, that moment of execution, as the point where grace or divine order or ultimate truth, whatever you want to call the thing Kay was searching for, moves into a dimension that simply can no longer be translated into human language. It can't be analyzed by human logic anymore.
It goes off the scale.
Exactly. It represents a kind of metaphysical stoppage, not the trial stopping, but human comprehension stopping. It's the point where human logic hits its firewall, its absolute limit. And this failure, paradoxically, proves that the ultimate order or truth, if it exists, must exceed the capabilities of our analysis. It's bigger than our system.
So the search for a halting condition ends, not because the trial itself halts,
but because the searcher, K, runs out of processing power. He hits the boundary of the humanly computable.
Wow. Okay. So if we accept that we might live in this kind of non-halting world, at least in some aspects, a world with undecidable elements, what does that mean for us? What defines the human subject in that scenario?
Well, it means we're perhaps no longer primarily defined by the results we achieve or the answers we find, because the ultimate answers might be structurally unavailable.
So what defines us instead?
Perhaps we are defined by the fact that we must continue to strive, to be, as the sources put it, striving beings or beings who attempt. We exist within a system whose ultimate outcome is, in crucial ways, unpredictable or unknowable from our vantage point, and our nature is to keep trying anyway.
And this is where the ethics come in, the ethics of striving.
Exactly. This is the crucial ethical pivot. The argument is that human dignity, human meaning, arises precisely from the repeated attempt, even the repeated failure of this striving. Kay doesn't win in any conventional sense. He doesn't get acquitted, he doesn't expose the court,
No, he certainly doesn't.
but his attempt to understand, his refusal to just give up, his insistence on appealing, on fighting, on seeking clarity even when none is forthcoming, that is what imbues his otherwise bleak existence with a kind of meaning, a kind of dignity.
So the dignity isn't in succeeding, but in the trying itself, even against impossible odds.
That's the core of the ethics of striving. It's the ethical movement, the value found in continuing to judge, to question, to attempt understanding, even when faced with a world that seems logically undecidable or absurd.
Can we pinpoint moments in the novel where we really see this dignity in Kay's attempts? It's so easy to just focus on his confusion and despair.
That's true, the despair is palpable. But think about his refusal to simply become passive. He could just drift along, accept his fate. But he doesn't.
Right. He keeps pushing.
His repeated attempts to appeal to higher authorities, even when he has no idea who they are or where they are, his frantic consultations with the useless lawyer hold. And then, crucially, his decision to fire hold because he felt the procedure wasn't rigorous enough, wasn't progressing.
Yeah, he wanted a more active defense, even if he didn't know what that meant.
Exactly. And his own deep dive into the law's bizarre labyrinthine social strata, visiting the painter Titorelli, trying to navigate the court offices, these are all moments of active, often desperate, striving against the incomprehensible.
So even though from the outside, we see his attempts might actually be feeding the loop, keeping the process running,
Yes.
the intention behind those attempts, the human desire for definition, for justice, for an answer, that's where the ethical value, the human element, resides.
That's precisely the argument. Kay is repeatedly faced with opportunities to just accept the absurdity passively, to give in, maybe even to just walk away and see what happens. But he insists time and again on trying to find the logic, find the end, resolve the situation, even if that very search is contradictory and self-defeating.
So the absurdity is the non-halting state of the world, it's the undecidable nature of the law.
And striving, trying, attempting. That's the essential human reaction. It's the act that ensures the world, and our experience of it doesn't just collapse into meaninglessness. Even failure becomes meaningful if it's the result of striving. It's almost an act of ontological maintenance for the self, for meaning itself.
Okay. Then his death.
Yeah.
Going back to that final scene one more time. It has to be seen not as a simple defeat.
Not just a defeat, no,
No.
but perhaps as the inevitable completion, the running out of an unstoppable procedure. It's a transition point.
A transition where the limit of human understanding, the point where Kay's striving hits the wall, that limit itself becomes a point of contact with something beyond, a kind of negative transcendence.
That's a powerful way to put it. Perhaps he didn't prove the system could halt and give him an answer, but by embodying the system's inherent undecidability all the way to the end, he proved the world's continuous, nonstop operating nature. His life provided the necessary input, the runtime, for the theorem of undecidability to be demonstrated in narrative form.
This really does transform the book. If you read it this way, the trial isn't just a record of one man's tragic downfall.
No, it becomes the exhaustive, meticulous record of humanity's attempt, personified in K, to calculate the world's halting problem, to find the final answer, the final verdict.
And the final, rather profound conclusion from these sources seems to be this.
That the very impossibility of success in this striving, the fact that we can't solve the ultimate problem, that we can't reach the final halting state, that very limitation is, paradoxically, what fundamentally defines our humanity. We are the striving component within the unhalting system. Our failure to achieve the ultimate resolution is, in a strange way, our most defining characteristic, maybe even our greatest, most human achievement. #OutRevamp.
Well, we have definitely completed our deep dive for today, and I feel like we've really shifted the entire framework for understanding Franz Kafka's The Trial. We've moved it from, just a critique of dusty bureaucrats and endless waiting,
Right, the standard stuff.
to seeing it as this incredibly profound statement on formal logic, on structural paradox, and on the inherent limits of self-knowledge that seem to exist within any complex self-referential system, whether that's law, language, or maybe even consciousness itself.
And Joseph K. gets redefined in this process, too. He's not just some hapless victim crushed by forces he doesn't understand.
No, he becomes almost like a central processing unit. Embodied consciousness attempting an impossible calculation, a calculation that ultimately proves the structural boundaries of the world or the system he inhabits. His death isn't just an end, it's the final proof of non-termination.
Yeah, it's quite a perspective shift.
So the sources we've explored today, they've really left us with this powerful, synthesized idea. if the very structure of existence, or at least aspects of it, might be defined by something like a non-halting program, something inherently undecidable from within.
Uh-huh.
And if the only, or perhaps the primary source of human dignity and meaning is found not in solving it, but in the repeated, perhaps impossible attempt to stop it or understand it or at least navigate it ethically.
Then this raises a final, maybe quite personal question for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive.
What's that?
What is the most profound, unhalting procedure in your own life? What is that one central goal or problem or essential task that, deep down you can never perfectly solve, never definitively complete? That thing you keep striving towards anyway.
That pursuit.
Yeah.
That potentially infinite loop that demands your focus, your energy, your striving.
That very thing, according to the kind of logic we've seen in Kafka today, might just be the process that provides the essential dignity, the ethical weight, the necessary striving, that keeps your own system, your own self functioning meaningfully in an often undecidable world. Something to think about.